All right, I'm about to go live. Well, I am live, but I'm about to go live. So let's do that. Let's take a look at me. Hey everybody, that looks funny. I'm just going to make a quick adjustment here to this image because it's kind of leaning over to me. All right, so there we go. Yeah, so what am I talking about today? I'm talking about Necromunda. I'm just going to tuck in here. And again, if you hear the sounds of the construction out there, I apologize for that, but there's not much I can do about that. Try and center myself to the camera. Should be more prepared for these sort of things, but again, this is all just a fantastic work in progress that I'm really enjoying doing. So what I'm going to do today, I'm actually doing something different. I'm not going to paint today. Not that I did paint a little bit earlier, not that I'm not going to paint later on this afternoon. I'm also going to flip this because that should probably be... Oh, let's not do that then. See, these are all the things that you need to... There we go. That makes me feel a little bit better for some reason. I don't know why. But what I'm talking about is Necromunda. So yeah, and I hope that... you'll stay a while and listen to me chat about what I believe is to be the best game that Games Workshop has produced since the previous version of Necromunda, and prior to that, I mean, I put it up there with games like Blood Bowl and Warhammer, like the original Warhammer. But what I want to do today is I just want to go through sort of the old rulebook and the new rulebook and take a look at what's changed. Talk about the rules differences. I'm not going to get too much into background. I actually have a planned piece of content that will be far more of a deep dive into what Necromunda is and who the people of Necromunda are and what goes on there. So that's going to be unable to stay but sub to have a good scene. Awesome, thank you. While hobbying. So thank you very much, and hola to you, Tyler. So I'm going to switch over here, and we're just going to take a quick look at what I've done. Oh, so I've got my desk set up here a little bit different. Normally you would be seeing my paints and all that stuff, but that's why I have it on a big portable platter. A PP, a portable platter, copyright 2020, Christian Stewart Enterprises. Did I just dox myself? Like you don't know who I am. If you know me, you know who I am. If you don't know me, what the fuck are you doing here? And it's construction outside, so yeah, so that's to be expected, and that's why I'm just doing this sort of a little bit more free form, and hopefully everything sounds good and looks good. But so this is Necromunda. Yeah, so this is this in here, and of course I've got it on my Frank Frazetta Up Ultra Pro playmat here. Beautiful Death Dealer there. So this is Necromunda. So this is the game that came out in 1995. Pretty sure it came out in 95. I want to say 95. The 90s are kind of a blur to me. This says 95, and I was there on the day it came out and bought it in 95, and this is the actual rulebook that was in the box that I split with a friend of mine, and we split. He took Goliaths. No, he took Warlocks. I took Goliaths. I didn't really want Goliaths, but he wanted the Orlocks, so I took the Goliaths, and I'm cool with that. And in this box, and again, I'm going to do a deep dive into the original Necromunda because at some point I've got a secret weapon that's just up here on top of this bookshelf. You can kind of see there. And I'm going to go through that. Muscle Bros. Yes, indeed. That was Tyrant of Badab in the chat. Definitely Muscle Bros. And I'll talk briefly about sort of the houses and what's sort of different between the houses in here and the houses in here. I just want to go through the rules because this was my favorite game of the 90s by far. When this came out in 95, my friend Nico and I pretty much stopped playing anything else, and we played Necromunda for 2 or 3 years straight. I think we stopped playing Necromunda to play Warzone 2nd Edition, we didn't really play too much 40k. Well, we played 40k. We played a lot of 40k 2nd Edition. 40k 3rd Edition we kind of delayed getting into because we were playing Warzone. But Necromunda was our bread and butter for quite a while. Certainly was the bulk of my hobbying days back in those mid-90s. So This is the rule book. There was another book that came in the box set called the source book, which was all your background material. And they sort of done that with new Necromunda too. I don't have my initial softcover releases for Necromunda, the new version of Necromunda that they did. They're downstairs in a storage locker because I've got all the hardcovers now, and the hardcovers are definitely the more comprehensive, better version of the game. Except that those softcovers are still perfectly usable. It's just that as they sort of the rules in the hardcover contain all the errata and FAQ and stuff, so it's almost like a 1.5 edition of the rules. So, and that's the rules we're going to look at because this is the hardcover Necromunda rulebook. So if you want to play Necromunda now, this is what you buy. There have been many versions of this rulebook, this being the first. There was, like I said, there was a source book that also came out. Eventually they packed the source book and this book and the Outlanders, which was the first supplement for Necromunda, which added scavies, redemptionists, ratskin gangs, and I want to say pit slaves and probably some other random stuff that I'm not remembering. But it also added like psychers, so you got your weirds in there, your beastmasters, and so it added more hired guns and weird stuff that you could put in your game, which is exactly what you want for a game like Necromunda. Pit slaves were White Dwarf. Thank you, Guerrilla Miniature Games. Awesome. Yeah, so there I stand corrected. I know that the three main gangs that were in there were the Scavies, the Ratskin Renegades, and because Ratskins weren't allowed to be a gang. So Ratskins that were gangs were basically Ratskin Renegades. I guess that makes sense because you could. So that's old Necromunda. I love this game. My favorite game. In and out of popularity with me. New Necromunda, and by what I mean by that is in and out of popularity to me that there's been various versions of this game. So after that, they packed them all into a hardcover. After that, there was a community edition that was essentially taken over by fandom, and Games Workshop published through their specialist games range sometime in the, I want to say like 2003, 2004-ish. I don't know. That was also a blur to me. But they published the community edition through them, and it was essentially this game at its core with a lot of revisions and a lot of stuff. And then there was a living rulebook online, and you can still get that living rulebook online through places like the Necromunda and I think Yak Tribe, and there's basically a Necromunda community edition website that still keeps that version of the game going. Get on my level, Fanatic 2003. Thank you very much, Fanatic, Specialist Games. I mean, Games Workshop has had so many ways of saying, this is an imprint we're going to use to publish a random game that we don't necessarily want to be Warhammer or 40K, but we'll let some people have some fun and make a game. And that's where I get to this, because the guys who made this were clearly having fun. Clearly knew Necromunda, played this version of the game, and loved this version of the game, and wanted to see the best possible Necromunda they could come out of this. And I think that's what they've done here. When it first came out, it was pretty simple. You had your house gangs, you had a few hired guns, you had your bounty hunters and stuff, and the house gangs were, in this version, almost identical. Everyone built their gang out of the same gang list. Here, each house has its own separate list of rules and stuff. So we'll just flip open the rulebook here, and we'll take a quick look, and we've got House Escher. So I've got my House Escher gang just sitting here watching me go through this. So I can pull up some of the models that we'll look at. So there's my version of that. And the Escher didn't come out until a little while later. So I played with the Goliaths until these models were available, which I think it was like within 2 months. I think Van Saar actually came out first because I had a Van Saar gang as well. But once the Escher came out, I was all Escher all the time. And then under here we've got a look at some of the other models that came out at the time. And our table of contents, of course, and then introduction. What is a game, right? And if we look over here, it's pretty much your first few pages are sort of the same. We've got our table of, we've got actually sort of a nice little splash here, giving you the gist of what's going on in Necromunda and the Underhive. I love this piece of artwork of the Hive City. So this information is actually in the source book, which I don't have available at the moment. It's somewhere downstairs in a box, and I'm not sure where, or it's lost to time, who knows, but I do have my original. This is still my original rulebook. So let's get in basically the background, and again, I'm not going to deep dive on what Necromunda is right now. in terms of the background and the state of the game, but it talks about where the game takes place, which is in a giant hive city. If you don't know what a hive city is, go look it up. Hive cities of Necromunda. There we go. Hopefully this is all looking good on screen for you guys. And then Lord Helmar, he rules Necromunda with an House Helmar. And then these are the houses. So there's the great houses, which are like the noble houses, and then there's the clan houses, who occupy the bulk of the city. So let's go back to our thing here. And so essentially you've got the Spire, which is where all the great houses live. Up here is where Helmar lives in the power, and there's a Imperial Fist chapter house there. And they talk about why the Imperial Fists are actually on Necromunda. And it has to do with another hive being overrun by orcs. The Spire was in old houses, and then there's a big wall. And most people will never, ever, ever go above the wall. Then you've got the Hive City, which is basically what runs up here and keeps up here in wealth, and those are your clan houses. And then you've got the Underhive, and the Bottom, and the Sump. So the current surface level is around here, and that's just a guess because it's just been built up over millennia, right? You're talking about a city that's, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years old, and has probably fallen apart and been rebuilt so many times within there, right? So where do our games take place? Well, our games take place down here in the Underhive. So most games of Necromunda take place underneath Necromunda. Hopefully. Maybe I'm doing some ASMR here with my page turning on the microphone. So yeah, so let's just skip ahead here past all the background that would normally be in the source book, and we'll get to the rules, and then we'll discuss sort of what the rules are. So if you've ever played old Necromunda, you may or may not know that essentially the core rules of Necromunda are Warhammer 40,000 2nd edition. So that's where in fact, if you look here, I'll throw these up. These tokens, these Necromunda tokens, are virtually identical to the tokens that you would get in 40k 2nd edition box set. These templates are virtually identical to the templates you would get in the 40k 2nd edition box set. And then this sort of goes through what else you're going to need, which is dice, and the scatter die, which is also carried over from 40k. And the sustained fire dice, which is from 40k. If anyone can tell me the first game that these were used in, and I know the answer, but if anyone can tell me the first game that Games Workshop used the scatter dice in, you win a fake internet point. You get one fake internet point if you can tell me what the first game that used these scatter dice was. And there is all kinds of filth and stuff in this book because I have not opened it in quite a while, apparently. Maybe I should have gone through and cleaned out all the guns that's in here. I don't even know what that is. I think I saw a piece of rice. So who knows what's going on there. But yeah, this book has seen better days. Again, it's 25 years old at this point. So the characteristics are roughly the same. So let's go in. You have your movement, which is how many inches you can move. I'm just going to toss that under there, even though it's a beautiful piece of art. Some good John Blanche. This is 95. You're hitting what I like to call peak grimdark. A lot of John Blanche art, supplemented by artists like Mark Gibbons, really defining the Warhammer aesthetic of the time. And right in 95, you're getting close to like peak grimdark, which I believe, to my opinion, what I think peak grimdark starts is with 40k 3rd edition. Actually, is that's where you're really hitting that pinnacle of like, this artwork is gunky and grungy, and it's showing me a world that I don't know if you definitely don't want to live in. And not that Warhammer 2nd edition wasn't that, because all the lore and stuff that basically was established in 40k 2nd edition influenced heavily 3rd edition. I'm talking more the art style and what they're presenting as the face of their game. If you look at the cover of the Warhammer 40k 2nd edition box set compared to the cover of the Warhammer 3rd edition box set, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. But we're here to talk about Necromunda rules. If anyone wants to like put train tracks in the chat every time I get off topic, the the chat will be full of train tracks. So move, how many inches you move. Essentially the same in this version of Necromunda and this version of Necromunda. Whatever your move number stat is how many inches your model can move. How you move is kind of a little different. Weapon skill, so if this is 2nd edition 40k, this is 8th edition 40k in terms of how the stat line is laid out. So instead of having a ballistic skill of 4, which means that you hit on a 4+, or ballistic skill of 3, which means that you hit on a, having a 4, which means you hit on a 3+, and having a 3, which means you hit on a 4+, they essentially just made the stat a positive number. So 4+. You need a 4+, you roll a 4+. Your modifiers are based on that, right? So that's weapon skill and ballistic skill. Strength and toughness are still relatively exactly the same. How hard you are to hurt. They've used their more simplified, newer version of same strength versus same toughness, higher, lower, and then double. So that's sort of where they scale what you wound on. So it goes 2+, 3+, 4+ sort of thing. Whereas over here, it's the old chart. The old chart. If you know older 40k, you know that there is a to wound chart, and you would cross-reference strength versus toughness and figure out what you needed to wound. Generally, it was the same, but this was a much... The current version is obviously a more modern way of getting to essentially the same result in a lot of ways. Wounds, how many wounds a fighter has, same thing over here. Initiative, attacks, leadership. Now, the cool thing about new Necromunda is they have added stats from old Warhammer, so stats that were dropped in, I want to say... 6th, so they were dropped in 6th edition Warhammer Fantasy. I believe they existed up until then. You know, I might be wrong. It might just be leadership. It may have been 4th edition, the first box set. I'm having a bit of a aneurysm right now. I could reach over and grab my rulebook and look, but let's not bother. Anyways, so there's 3 more stats. These stats originally came from old Warhammer, and they were used in Warhammer Fantasy roleplay considerably. So we're looking at your leadership, which is, again, the same as your leadership you would have over here. So where here you have leadership, here they've broken it up into 4 psychological stats. So leadership, cool, willpower, and intelligence. Because you will often be called out during the game to make rolls on these stats, and they can be different, right? You can be smarter than you are brave. You can be cooler under pressure than you are intelligent at figuring out how to hack a console. So breaking those stats down into sort of their more component mental attributes was something that they used to do back in the day, and something that they do again now in New Necromunda. They never did it in this Necromunda, but they did it in this Necromunda, and I think that's cool. Because again, it allows you to create more scenarios where you're using your stats to interact with things. So cool is very important for not running away, right? You would think leadership would, but it's actually not. Cool, your leader has to make leadership tests a lot. And generally you would use their leadership if you're ever called on to use a leadership test, because they have bubbles or auras or whatever we want to call it. But cool is probably one of the most important stats in the game, because it's the one that keeps you from just bugging out, right, and leaving. And then willpower is also useful, especially for like resisting psychic powers, which happens later on when you start adding in that sort of stuff. So there's your characteristics for Necromunda. Essentially very much the same. Models and fighter cards. So this is obviously not quite in the same order, but so in New Necromunda, we'll put that here. In New Necromunda, you get a fighter card. So you would have a gang roster, and then you would also have fighter cards. I have my fighter cards here for my Escher gang, and they're all ready to go. So I've given them all names. So this is my leader. This is Briar, Mistress of Thorns, and she is my gang queen. All her weapon stats, her skills and war gear, and her cost and credits. And it's essential that you have these for the game, because they're used quite frequently. In old Necromunda, they didn't have these cards. You essentially had just a single gang roster that had all the information for all your gangers on it. You still have that for this, but it actually doesn't have this information on the gang roster. I can grab a gang roster. I can. Look. Oh, I'm so prepared. Look at this. Boom. So here's what the new gang roster would look like. And I actually did this totally wrong, because I actually put in equipment because I was just pricing stuff out. So this was just me before I put the stuff onto cards. This was my worksheet, essentially. So I'm going to tear this. So get ready for this. This is going to sound great. Yeah. So there's a fresh, clean sheet of a gang roster for new Necromunda. Gang name, your house, obviously, your gang rating, your reputation, and your turf size. 3 very important things. Gang rating determines matchups, bonuses you'll get in matchups, and things like that, which was very much like the gang rating in the previous version of Necromunda. So the new version sort of splits out gang rating and reputation into 2 separate things. I'm going a lot by memory here, so if I get anything wrong, let me know. Is this the HeroQuest reveal stream? It is, but we're not revealing it till the very end of the stream. So you just keep watching this space, and HeroQuest will appear at any moment somewhere on the screen. Funny trivia, piece of trivia about HeroQuest, I've never played it. Never played Advanced HeroQuest. Played Warhammer Quest. I played Space Crusade, and I played Advanced Space Crusade, but never HeroQuest. Odd. Where are we going here? Let's talk about weapon profiles. Pretty much this is taken straight from Warhammer 8th edition, Warhammer 40k 8th edition. Sort of. No. Sorry. Warhammer 40k 2nd edition. This is basically what your weapon profiles would look like. Let's see, are they on the last page here? I'll just see if I can flip in here. Oh, we got pictures of models. So very similar looking to these weapon summaries here. Again, you've got a short range, you've got a long range, you've got modifiers to hit at short and long, you've got the strength, you've got your damage, you've got a save modifier. Here they call it AP, because that's the new version of save modifier. You've got your ammo roll, which was sort of a construct for Necromunda. There's no ammo rolls in Warhammer 40k 2nd edition, which this is based on. And then you've got your special rules. So where this is the special rule of close combat, here it would have the special rule of melee, which means that you can basically use it in the close combat phase. There's a lot more to new weapon profiles, though, because they've kept them. Let's see if I can go to the back, and if there's a weapon profile summary we can take a quick look at. I know there's one on page 113 of the House of Blades book, because I keep referencing that, so let's pull that down. And it's somewhere around page 113. So this is one of the hardcover supplements for New Necromunda. It just came out, House of Blades. It's all about the Escher, my favorite gang in Necromunda, and forever my favorite gang. So here we go. So here's a weapon reference chart. 115. I was close. It starts on 113. Come on. Give me a break here. So hopefully you can see this okay. I kind of was playing with the lighting to try. If I found that if the lights were too bright, I was getting too much glare off the pages, and you couldn't read it. So let me know in the chat if it looks good. Shadow War was 2nd edition rules. Yes, Shadow War was sort of like it was basically Necromunda. It was a very stripped down version of the final community edition of Necromunda in some ways, but just adapted to throw in 40k things. Really, I think that box was just designed to get Sector Mechanicus terrain into people's hands, and it totally worked, because I have a giant shelf of Sector Mechanicus terrain here, and a lot of that I got out of my Shadow War Armageddon book. So here's the weapon references, and again, you're looking at a lot of the same sort of things, but weapons will have abilities like knockback. Or scatter shot, which means you can hit models close by. Rapid fire means that whatever number comes up on your firepower die, which is the new version of the sustained fire dice, which is kind of just like the old version of the sustained fire dice, but you always roll it because they've changed the way ammo rolls kind of work, and we'll get into that when I get into the rules. But so you've got all your different types of weapons. Silent, Toxin, my favorite. Silent and Toxin are 2 of my favorite weapon traits for my Escher. And then you get into pistols. So if they have the sidearm ability, then that means that you can actually use them to make an attack in close combat. But you have to assign one of your attacks to that. But you will get a bonus attack for having an additional weapon. So, and we'll get into that when we get into how close combat works. If you've ever played Warhammer 40k 2nd edition, or Warhammer 40k 8th edition, because 8th edition takes so much from Warhammer 40k 2nd edition that you almost wonder why we ever went through 3rd through 7th, right? When 2nd edition was such a good version of the game. I blame Andy Chambers, and not in a bad way, but I blame Andy Chambers, because he wrote that. Speaking of Andy Chambers, so this version was written by Rick Priestley and Jervis Johnson and Andy Chambers. Rick Priestley essentially wrote 2nd edition 40k, wrote most of he wrote Rogue Trader. He's Rick Priestley. If you don't know who Rick Priestley is, I don't know what you're doing here. So let's get back to talking about Where were we? Well, since these books are not exactly laid out the same, we'll go into the turn phase. Turn phase is pretty much similar. This talks about dice principles. One of the cool things, and I should grab some of my Necromunda dice to show you, but one of the cool things is that there's a dice called the Firepower die, which is the new just sustained fire dice. So the Firepower die, you always roll when you make a ranged attack, right? Regardless of whether or not it means anything, because it could always potentially mean something. If you get a little bullet holes, that's how many shots you get, but only if your weapon is capable of rapid fire. If you get a little ammo symbol, then you have to make an ammo roll. So that's how you make ammo rolls in New Necromunda. So many games. Old Necromunda, it was basically if you rolled a 6 to hit, you had to make an ammo check. So you hit, but you might be out of ammo. My friend Nico and I, we changed it to 1s because we thought, like, well, shouldn't it suck to roll a 1? So let's make it so that ammo rolls happen on 1s and not on 6s. And we did that for a while, and then eventually I think we just reverted back to, we house ruled it back the other way. In New Necromunda, you have vision arcs, which you kind of did have in Old Necromunda, but they've got little templates. So, and your line of sight stuff. The game, as it first came out, came with two-dimensional tiles. So a lot of these rules were not really necessarily present in there. They had two sections. It's like, here's the rules if you're using the tiles, and here's the rules if you're using three-dimensional terrain, right? Essentially what they call the Sector Mechanicus rules, which still kind of stand to this day because GW loves to now make rules for terrain. So all the terrain sets that come out also happen to have rules for them. So what are we looking at here? So line of sight, measurements, again, so that's kind of like movement. You charge the same way, where you move and charge. You move much the same way. Charge is a little different. Old school charge, you doubled your movement, and that's what you charge. New school charge, it's your movement plus a D3, and you can potentially modify that depending on skills and abilities you may have. Conditions, which they go into here nicely. Also, what I will say about the new Necromunda rulebook is that it's got a modern layout, so it really discusses the ideas you need to know first going further, whereas this sort of breaks it down by turn structure. It's like, okay, so you've got your movement turn, you've got your shooting, you've got your close combat, and then sort of your finishing up turn sequence. Recovery, right? Movement, shooting, hand-to-hand recovery. This presents it more in a way that shows you what you need to know before you flip over to the next page, which is a great concept if you're designing books. So here we go. So here's terrain, and again, you've got your Zone Mortalis terrain and your Sector Mechanicus terrain, and there's different rules that would apply. Necromunda, the box game, came with three-dimensional terrain, and so all the rules presented in the original Necromunda are designed for use with that terrain or terrain that you make kind of like that. So here we go. Rules. So let's get into the game structure. So here we have the turn. So we have movement, shooting, hand-to-hand, and recovery. Here you have your round sequence. You roll for priority. Then you have your action phase. In Old Necromunda, I moved my entire gang, did everything with my entire gang. Then you would do everything with your entire gang. So as I go, take my turn, you take your turn. Here, it's essentially whoever has the priority, and that's what that little coin was for. This is the priority coin. So whoever has the coin has priority, and they get to start activating their models first. So they can pick one of their models to activate, and they do everything with that model, and then they move, and then the other player does something with their model. You can group activate. Leaders can group activate with 2 other fighters. Champions can group activate with 1 other fighter, potentially. Not all. Like, there's some champions that can't do the group activation thing. And then things like if you have pets, so beasts and things like that, they would activate with that model. So my little beast handler that I'm painting up here, and her kitty cats, meow meow, her 2 kitty cats, they would activate together as a group. And you could potentially have my leader activate with her, and say with this Juve, and then I would then pick which one to resolve first, then which one to resolve second, which one to resolve first. When it comes to her turn to activate, I would then do the 2 kitties at the same time. So it becomes this large hunting pack, and you can kind of again, it's a great options for strategy and potential for killer combos and killer plays, right? Which is what you want in a game. You want something that on the surface level is easy to pick up and understand, but then when you start getting into the nitty-gritty of it, becomes, a much more complicated game to master. I guess what would we call that kind of game? It's on the tip of my tongue. Easy to learn, a lifetime to master, whatever. So and then in the end phase, if you have to take bottle tests, you take bottle tests. A recovery test, so any model that you have that's down. Sorry, I keep mentioning this, that I'm growing my hair out, and it's kind of a disaster these days. So if you see me playing with my hair, it's because I'm watching myself, and I'm an extremely vain person, and I want to make sure that I look as good as humanly possible. I mean, let's admit it, it's not a hard task. Recovery tests, rally tests. So again, this is sort of more of your psychological section stuff. Recovering, so you basically make an injury roll from any models that's down. They could potentially get back up with a flesh wound. They could potentially just die. Well, you take a serious injury, or they could just stay basically lying on their face. And you have to roll on an injury chart right away in New Necromunda. In Old Necromunda, you would roll in the end, at the end of the game, and sort of like your post campaign cleanup stuff, where you went and visited the things. That's another thing. That's campaign structure is quite different in New Necromunda. It's a lot of changes, actually. It's quite a different game. I may have bitten off more than I can chew here. So here we go. So priority phase. Again, we both roll off for that. If it's a tie, I believe the person who didn't have priority gets priority. Ready your fighters. So all your fighters essentially get a ready token, and you can put that on their gang card, or you can put that beside the model to remind you that this model has not yet activated, because once you're going back and forth, it can be tricky to know, well, have I done this guy's actions? You did that guy's actions, but you did that. Okay, yeah, so I haven't done this guy, so he's going to go. So that sort of stuff. So having those tokens, it's tokens, right? Great thing. Action phase. So, and in the action phase, if one of your side failed their bottle test previously, and your gang is bottle tests are like your overall leadership test. So once you fail your bottle test, you don't necessarily leave. You can still win the game. You can still keep playing, but you have to keep rolling for all your fighters and see if they're going to bug out. So the first thing you do is you roll for your leader, because they have an ability that anyone within 12 inches of them, if they pass, everyone within 12 inches passes. So you roll your leaders, you roll your champions, and then you start rolling your gangers and your other ne'er-do-wells. So in this Necromunda, it wasn't really quite that way in terms of what a model could do. A model was very much based, what they could do was very much based on Warhammer 40k 2nd edition. So you moved in the movement phase, you shot in the shooting phase, you did hand-to-hand in the hand-to-hand phase, and then you did your turn cleanup sort of thing, each of you in your own separate turn. So here you have actions that models can actually do. So here we have essentially what they knock down to basic actions and simple actions and double actions. So a basic action is something that any model can do, that they can do more than once, because I believe simple actions you can only do once. Yeah. A simple action can be performed more than once during activation. So shooting is a basic action, right? I believe that there is a skill that allows you to turn shooting into a simple action, which means that you can do it twice, because everyone gets 2 actions, right? And your double action is things like standing, charging. Charging is a double, and it all says here what they are. So charge is a double action. Crawling through a ductway is a double action. So you have to start your turn at one side of the ductway, and then you emerge on the other side of the ductway, and that uses both your actions to do that. Taking cover is a basic action, so I can walk up to something and take cover behind it, right? Because move is a simple action, and take cover is a basic action. That's my 2 actions. So all your different actions, all the different things that a fighter can do in their turn are covered by these actions and how much it actually takes. There's a fantastic skill that my gang leader had in my game against Nico. I took, it's called Rain of Blows or something, and it basically turns a fight basic action into like a close combat simple action. So she can do it twice. So she gets like 6 attacks, right? But it's 2 sequences, because when we get into close combat, your opponent gets to hit you back. Your opponent gets to make reactions. So that is sort of the interruption to the turn of Necromunda. And then this just goes into Insanity, which it's Necromunda, man. You're no one's coming out with a full deck of cards, that's for sure. And then we get into your movement, and it has your 1-inch rules. Again, like I said, movement in Necromunda, both versions. Run is a double move, or is it a... It's, I believe... Well, we could go back and take a look. So there's a move simple, so you can just move and then move again because it's simple, right? Charge is a double, but charge is basically your movement plus D3, whereas charge in old Necromunda was just double your movement. So, and then again, this talks about a little bit about terrain, because obviously we're talking about movement. And we've got our terrain section here. In 40k second edition, it was called soft cover, hard cover. Soft cover was your trees and bushes and stuff, and whatever you deemed a soft cover. Hard cover was your hard stuff, rocks, walls, whatever, right? -1 to hit for soft cover, -1 for hit long. Well, in the Underhive, there's no such thing as soft cover. Everything's hard in the Underhive. So they called it partial cover and full cover. And it's in here. We'll get to sort of that right here. So this is what cover looked like in old Necromunda. In cover, in partial cover, out in the open. So you're either -1 if the target's in, -2 if the target's in cover, but partial cover is just any part of your base is obscured. You've got a chance that could, and there were minuses to your hit roll, which is like 40k second edition. Which in third edition, 40k decided to make cover a save, a bonus save, as opposed to having modifiers to dice rolls, because people can't do math, is what I'm assuming Andy Chambers thinks, is that no one can do math. Climbing, because there's a lot of climbing in Necromunda. The Sector Mechanicus terrain is 5 inches high, and most models have most fighters in Necromunda have a 5-inch movement. That means that if you start at the bottom of the ladder, you will end your move at the top of the ladder. In this version of Necromunda, the bulkheads are 3 inches high, and most models had a 4-inch movement. So you had an inch of leeway on either side there when you're trying to climb up. So it changes the dynamic slightly. But you can run up ladders, you can climb, you can take a double up ladders, you can even stop halfway up a ladder and turn around and shoot while you're hanging off the ladder, which is dramatic and would look awesome. So let's get into shooting here. So again, much of the same in terms of shooting. Who can shoot? You still have your 90-degree arc, which you do have in New Necromunda. You have to shoot at the closest target. Target priority, so basically I think you can pass a cool check. There's again that cool stat, it's very important. If you want to shoot at anyone that's not your target, that's not the closest target, you have to pass a cool check, and then you can pick any enemy fighter. And I think that, yeah, if you can't target fighters in hiding, and I think you can choose to target a further model if they're easier to hit without taking the cool check. I would have to read this little paragraph of text here, but I'm not going to read it online. But I'm pretty sure that's the way it works, is that, at least that's the way it worked in old Necromunda, I believe. You know, having not played old Necromunda in many, many years now. But I believe that you could always choose to shoot a easier to hit target. If the closest target was like in hard cover, and there's another guy that's like 10 feet behind him, but he's just standing out there in the open, you can pick off the idiot standing out in the open, right? So again, make the hit roll. So we have accuracy, same sort of thing, hit modifiers. Here we have small target and large target. Here we have target is engaged, so you can shoot into close combat, but you're at -1 to hit. And then there's also, I believe there's rules for you might have to randomize. I know that we figured it out 2 years ago, which was the last time I played this version of Necromunda. Oh no, sorry, the last time I played this version of Necromunda was a week ago. Previous to that, my previous campaign was back 2 years ago. Not quite 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. Blast markers, you've got blast markers, you've got cover. So a lot of stuff's sort of the same. This covers flame templates, stray shots, which a lot of people forget to use the stray shot rule. It's probably one of the most forgotten rules in Necromunda. But essentially, if I attack you with a ranged weapon, there's a chance that any enemies that are engaged or that are within 1 inch along the line could be hit. So even if I miss, I can still roll a die and roll a 4, 5, 6 and hit the guy standing beside your buddy, right? Or it could be my guy that I hit because, you know, you're shooting wildly. So this has a 2 wound section in the shooting section, and I believe they may. So here we go, flame templates. So a lot of the same stuff. Let's check out hand-to-hand combat. So I believe hand-to-hand combat has basically talks about, yeah, so wounding, it just says refer back to shooting for wounding. Whereas here, they go shooting, close combat, and then they're going to talk about wounding. So, sorry, I'm knocking stuff over. Too many books, not enough table space here. So close combat is awesome. I love the way the close combat works in this version, in the new version of Necromunda. The old version of Necromunda, it was based on the 40k second edition close combat rules, which were much more geared towards resolving large close combats quickly. So essentially the way it worked was that you would roll a number of dice equal to your attacks, and then I would roll a number of dice equal to my attacks. We'd essentially do this at the same time. Figure out how many hit. I can then parry yours. If you roll something and I have a sword that can parry, I can force you to reroll one of yours. And then we take our highest die number. This is silly. Take our highest die number, which if you're rolling 3 dice, it could be a 6. And if you roll a 6, I believe you get an additional bonus of +1 or something. And we basically add our weapon skill to that number. So I have a weapon skill of 4. I add my 6 to my 4. I scored a 10. You have a weapon skill of 3, and you rolled a 5, so you have an 8. So that's 2 I beat you by. So I hit you twice. So now I would now make 2 wounding rolls against you. That's 40k close combat, 40k second edition close combat in a nutshell. And that's kind of the way that Necromunda did it too. Where you take up your attack dice, figure out how many attack dice you roll. We both roll them. Whoever rolls higher, so it's an all or nothing thing, right? I'm either wounding you, and you're doing nothing to me, or you're wounding me, and I'm doing nothing to you, or rolling to wound, right? So I get a number of hits. I take my 2 hits. I roll basically my strength versus your toughness. Anything that gets through, you then make your armor save. If you fail your armor save, I then get to make an injury roll for you, which in old Necromunda was a d6 roll. We'll go back to the shooting section to see that, because that's what old Necromunda wants us to do. Wound. So once you figured out how, so I roll a d6. On a 1, you're flesh wounded, which means that you're just on your back, so you're pinned. And I take -1 off your weapon skill and ballistic skill. So a flesh wound in old Necromunda was -1 weapon skill, -1 ballistic skill. It's not like that in new Necromunda. In new Necromunda, it's off your toughness. So if you have a flesh wound and your toughness 3, you're now toughness 2. And you can take a number of flesh wounds equal to your toughness. Once the number of flesh wounds you have equals your toughness, you're out of action. So you could have up to 2, basically, and still be walking around with a toughness of 1, right? But the next shot is just you're done. 2 to 5 is you're down, and in New Necromunda they call that serious injury. And what that means is that you're on your face and you're crawling. So you're hurt, but you're not quite sure what the extent of your hurt is. You could be bleeding out, in which case the following turn when you roll your injury dice, you could just go out of action, or you could have patched yourself up enough that you're able to stand back up and rejoin the fight. So you at that point you would then be flesh wounded. Or on a 6, you're out of action. So this breaks down mathematically to be pretty much the same as this, but this has its own custom dice for determining your injury roll. So that's the difference between old Necromunda and new Necromunda on that. And you can see here's the wound chart I was talking about. So you actually have a chart you cross-reference. Whereas a new Necromunda, it's based on the mathematical principles of Warhammer 8th edition, where it's I need a 5 or a 6 to wound you, depending on, like, if your toughness is over twice my strength, then I need a 6 to wound you. If it's higher than my strength, I need a 5. If it's the same as my strength, I need a 4. If it's lower, I need a 3. And if it's more than twice as low, then I wound you on a 2. So same sort of thing. This just does it on a nice, big, fancy chart for you to cross-reference, because that's what we did back in the 90s. And the new one is just like a mathematical sequence and whatever. So assists and interference, which is kind of cool. So for each model you're engaged with, I get +1 to hit, and you're -1 to hit on any attacks back, right? So you essentially get an assist. So if I'm assisting, but you can also have assists and not be interfered with. It's weird, because some models may have a larger engagement range. So figuring out who's engaged with who, and generally it's when you're ganging up on someone that you'll get these bonuses, and they'll be getting these minuses. So here we go. Here's the 3 symbols that will appear on the injury dice. And same sort of thing. Flesh wound, serious injury, which would be called down now, and out of action, which is still called out of action. So they changed down to serious injury. Armor saves, armor penetration, same sort of principles as Warhammer 8th edition, which is essentially taken right from Warhammer 2nd edition in a lot of ways. So let's look at lasting injuries. So in old Necromunda, when you got a lasting injury, that would be, you would essentially roll for that in the end phase of the game when you're doing your campaign rolls and stuff. The way campaign rolls work in New Necromunda is you actually do them before the game, which is interesting because that way you're sort of doing them with an opponent there to sort of say, like, okay, so I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and this, and this, and this, and prepare for our game, which I think is really cool. In this version of Necromunda, as soon as a model goes out of action, you make a lasting injury roll for them, which means that as a player playing in the campaign, when one of your models is taken off the table, you will immediately know what has happened to that model, which is kind of cool. So they could be anything from getting bonus experience because they learned a valuable lesson, to getting head injuries, eye injuries, body parts smashed, whatever, right? And then death, which is, of course, the what happens if you roll a 61 to 65. You're essentially critically injured, which means you will die unless you go to the dock. 66 means that you're a memorable death. You're dead, and your attacker the person who took you out gains an additional point of experience because you get experience for taking models out of action in Necromunda, because Necromunda is a campaign game, and probably, I would almost say, like the primogenitor of campaign games, because me personally, I don't think I played a game with this kind of an experience and development that wasn't an RPG, a role-playing game, until I played Necromunda. There may have been some out there. I'm not really aware of them. I mean, it's possible that, like, BattleTech had some weird esoteric campaign system where your mechs got better over time. I don't know. I don't play BattleTech, and I will never play BattleTech. Not that I hate BattleTech, but I fucking hate BattleTech. I don't hate the players. I hate the game. No, wait. It's the other way around. Okay. So, end phase, which you would also have in old Necromunda. So let's get through hand-to-hand. We talked about hand-to-hand. We talked about fumbles. Oh, fumbles, if you roll a 1, it adds to your opponent's score. So if I rolled a 6 and you rolled a 1, my base is like 8 at this point. I haven't even added my weapon skill yet. And you're adding your 1 because you suck. So I'm hitting you like 7 or 8 times. So that's 7 or 8 wound rolls I get to make. Yes, 40k 2nd edition close combat worked poorly in my opinion. It's the one thing about the game that, even though this version of Necromunda is still one of my most favorite games of all time, close combat, it didn't work for me. It didn't make any sense to me, but we played it, and that's the way it was, and we liked it. Advanced game rules. So that covers your basic rules. In here, we just start getting into weirds and stuff. These advanced rules in old Necromunda are essentially like, what happens when a model fails its initiative test and falls? What happens when you're jumping and you fall and you fail? What happens if you have stray shots? So we have this. So those are in the core rules there. The advanced game rules, you always play with advanced game rules because you're playing in a miniature game and you're an advanced human being. So always, you can't say that you won at Necromunda if it's not advanced Necromunda. You understand? Exploding weapons, wild grenades. Oh, so many good things. Attacking structures. So psychology. Again, psychology. You have the same sort of things as you had in classic Warhammer. So you have your fear, you have your terror. Your models can be subject to stupidity. Your models can be frenzied. You can hate other models. You can literally, there's a result you can roll on the lasting injury table where the guy who took you out, you now hate him. So anytime you fate that guy's gang, and that fighter is there, you're after him, right? And then you get into an armory here, which just is fantastic. And for those of you who have like the War Gear book from 40k 2nd edition, you'll recognize a lot of how this is laid out and what this looks like. So here we have our hand-to-hand combat weapons, right? Our good old chainswords being strength 4. So if you have a model that was strength 5, you don't give him a chainsword because he's losing his potential. And generally the rules are fairly simple. I like this. So a massive axe, sword, or club. So you get +2 strength, but it is, which is great as user +2, but opponent will win draws. So if we roll the same number on our crazy hand-to-hand combat dice, and we both come up a 7 or whatever, then you win because I'm using a big-ass axe or sword or club, right? We got our chains, we got our swords, we got our power weapons. And again, power swords, power axes, power fists, power mauls. Keep all the power weapons separate. Why'd we do that in 40k 3rd edition where we just made all power weapons power weapons? I feel like this is starting to be me ragging on 3rd edition 40k. I wonder why. Maybe because it's not my favorite version of the game. Although it's probably the version of the game I spent the most amount of time with, which just tells you all about my life you need to know, right? That subject myself to that for 2 decades or whatever. Pistols, needle pistols. I love those needle pistols. Plasma pistols. If your gang leader was a true boss, your gang leader had a plasma pistol. So this is my gang leader from my old Escher gang. And you can see she's got a power sword and a plasma pistol. And a purple coat. And orange hair. Because it was the 90s and that's just the way you did it, right? So color theory be damned. I'm just going to paint whatever colors I feel like. And here's my new leader, who's somewhat similar. She doesn't have a power sword, although I have used that as a power sword in the past. It's actually going to be used as a mastercrafted stiletto blade. And she has a bolter needler. And so, yeah. So she's a bit different. But guess what? They both have coats. But this one's got like a black coat, and this one's got a purple coat. And other than that, they're the exact same model. Yeah, so let's get back into it. Web pistols. Web pistols in New Necromunda, so good. And they are, I believe they are just like a core choice for Delac gangs. So if you want to web everyone with your little web fists and stuff, just load up on web weapons, take Delac, and just web everyone. Battletech is amazing, says Lorand. Yeah, I feel that 3rd and 40k in a nutshell. Oh well, we all hate it. That's all we played, LOL. You know what? 3rd edition was 3rd, 4th, and 5th. You can even say 6th and 7th. Though less so 6th and 7th. Less so 5th. 5th tried to fix the problems of 3rd. 3rd was a huge hole, but at the same time, it's where the game probably experienced one of its largest periods of growth. So say what you will about 40k 3rd edition. It allowed 40k 4th edition to happen, right? And it's not a bad game. And I don't think that that Andy Chambers, who wrote it, doesn't write good games, because he wrote Battlefleet Gothic, and I think Battlefleet Gothic is one of the coolest games. But I think that there were probably some meetings where they decided how they wanted to approach the design theory of 3rd edition, and I think that there was probably an edict from somewhere that says we need to make this as simple at its core as possible, not worry about the periphery stuff, because there wasn't a lot of periphery stuff, especially lore-wise, in 40k 3rd edition when it first came out. If you have any of those 3rd edition codexes, I think my only codex I have up here for 3rd edition is my Orc codex, because orcs, right? So if you have those, so there's like next to no lore, 0 world building early on, although there's a lot of world building in the rulebook, but like the way that they tried to segregate the lore from the rules is really apparent in 3rd edition. They didn't want, because I'll tell you, in 2nd edition, sometimes you had to hunt for rules, and sometimes a rule will be hidden in 3 paragraphs of text that's like lore, rule, lore, and you're reading and you're reading and you're reading, and okay, so here's the rule, and here's some more talking about, whatever. A lot of the older GW rule books have that problem. The ones that have like the greatest of that problem, and I mean like they have that problem in a good way. Oh no, it's not here because I was using it to read, but it's related to this, which is Wog the Orcs. If you look at Here We Go, which is the first like all orc rulebook that covers the first 3 orc clans, and they published that in like 1990, essentially when they sort of figured out who the space orcs were going to be and put them into 40k and gave them their own publications. I feel like I've seen like my viewers going down, and I think it's because I'm talking about orcs. Maybe I need to get back to Necromunda. But anyways, sometimes they would hide rules inside lore and fluff, and 3rd edition really tried to segregate that. So again, here's to finish up your base, and probably one of the best basic guns in the game, and every starting gang should start with a model with one, and to this day I still have that principle. My starting Escher gang for our new campaign will contain this girl with a shotgun, because shotguns are like one of the best weapons, most versatile, useful weapons in Necromunda. And they may not look like it when you look at them on the page, but you will regret not having a model with a shotgun around when you need it, because they're great. And then we get into special weapons, so we'll just flip through here. And again, these are great, fantastic renders, which I believe, and just looking at them I can tell, I'm pretty sure that it was Mark Gibbons who drew all of these. We got our heavy bolter, we got our heavy stub guns, and we've got a fantastic piece of John Blanche artwork here, and we've got our las cannon. If you took a las cannon in Necromunda, you were steady ballin', because A, you could afford a las cannon, and B, you do not need a las cannon in Necromunda. You are far better off served with a heavy bolter, even a heavy plasma gun, which I used this model as. I could have used her as just a model with a plasma gun, but I used her as a model with a plasma gun. See, you caught me in some BS there. So I would use her as a model with a plasma gun, and I believe that in the catalog she's listed, construction again, I believe in the catalog that she is listed as a heavy plasma. That's the thought I was trying to get out of my head. I believe you are correct, sir. Yes. Okay, so, and then grenades. And again, what's Necromunda without grenades, and what's, without table saws? This is just what the Underhive would sound like, right? I'm adding ambiance. Gas. Lots of different types of scare gas. Hallucinogens. So this is copied right out of 2nd edition 40k, which is perfect, because hallucinogen gas, if your model falls for it, you gotta roll on this chart. And what you're going to end up with is something hilarious happening. So this is where you sort of get a nice little narrative invasion. And I'll read some of these out here because I love old hallucinogen grenade. And where this actually comes from is the old, I believe there was a hallucination psychic power in this book here that sort of started that trend of like, roll on this chart to see what. And if you really want to trace it back, you can go all the way back to 1986. When the Skaven Army write-up was published in the Spring 86 Citadel Journal, and in there, the Poison Globes had a chart that you would roll on to see what happened to the model that got hit by the Skaven Poison Globe, and it was very much like this. So here's 1. So if you roll a 1, you resist. Wild and dizzying visions spin before the victim's eyes as he battles to overcome his inner madness. Roll a further d6. On a 1 to a 3, the victim resists the visions and is unaffected. On a 4 to 6, roll again on this chart. So you have a chance to basically get out of it. Even though you failed up here, you have a chance to get out of it. 2, they're crawling all over me. Bugs. The victim is convinced that he is covered with spiders, plague rats, or other unpleasant creatures. The victim is pinned in place by sheer horror, just as if he had been hit by a shot. He cannot test to avoid this and can do nothing for his next turn. So basically takes you out of the game for a turn. Over there, you think you hear something over there, right? My favorite is Traitors, where you just start shooting your friends. Run for it, where you just bugger off. So basically, essentially, they as if they failed a leadership test. And then 6, we'll read 6, because 6 is always good, right? The victim lapses into a mindless, slack-jawed state for the remainder of the encounter. Do not roll again on this chart, even if the model remains within the hallucinogenic gas. The fighter is unharmed and recovers after the game is over, but takes no further part in the encounter and can be removed from play. He does count as out of action for the purposes of bottle rolls. So you basically just become a dribbling vegetable for the rest of the game. Fantastic, right? Plasma grenades, photon flash, smoke, and your armor. New Necromunda has many, many more types of armor. And gangs will have armor that's particular to them. Like Goliaths have what do they call it? Forge plate, which is really protecty on the front, but not so protecty on the back, because they use it when they're working hard and playing hard. Carapace armor, you've got a model of Carapace armor, you're pretty awesome, but you'll take an initiative hit. Mesh armor exists. Flak armor is essentially the exact same, and mesh armor is pretty much exactly the same. I think they changed the way that Carapace works. I think you have light Carapace and heavy Carapace in new Necromunda. But that's not even... I don't even think that stuff is in this book. Because this is rules, not necessarily... we would have to go to the Gangs of the Underhive book to get all the rules for weapons, to get all the rules for weapon abilities and skills and things like that. Essentially, that's the book that teaches you how to build a gang. This is the book that shows you what to do with the gang, right? Ammunition, miscellaneous equipment we've got here. One day I'll get a new webcam that's better than using an old iPhone as a webcam. If you see me keep flickering out there, that's because I'm using an old iPhone as a webcam. So, I mean, while the camera on it is fantastic, its connectivity through some app and software on my PC is not great. But you didn't come here for that. You came here to hear me talk about Necromunda. So here we have some examples of layouts. So this is what you can do with the terrain that comes in the main box. And in the main box, you got 3 of these buildings. This one was a 3-story. This one was a 2 with a tower in the middle. And this one was a 2-story with a big hole in the middle. And you got some extra like little platforms and stuff that you could make. This one, it says, if you've got 2 sets, make this. We never had 2 sets. We had this, and then we had the stuff that came with Outlanders. And then here we go. So here are catalog pages. Oh, glorious catalog pages. The days and days where I would just spend just staring at miniatures in a catalog like this, like a little black and white. They've taken the miniature, they've glued it to a base, and they've washed it so that you can see all the detail on it and how fantastic that looks. Glorious, glorious, glorious Necromunda. And here's the Escher. So these were sort of the starter boxes. Some of these you can see like they have 2 liters. So 1 liter would come in the starter box. I believe this guy came in the starter box. And then you would get a selection of gangers, and I think that was it. I think the Juves and the heavies all came separately. You may have gotten 1 heavy in the starter box. Someone can correct me on that. I'm sure that someone could go look. But these were the initial Escher models, and these are the Goliath models. So I did end up picking up a few of these Goliath models when they came out to supplement my old plastic Goliath gang. I used this guy as my leader because he has a chain. No, he doesn't have a chainsaw head. It's the other leader has a chainsaw head. He has a fantastic chainsword, though. Look at the chainsword on that model. Here are your Juves, and then I think they released a 3rd or 4th Juve. I think each gang had 4 Juve models. I know the Escher did, and one of my Juves has gone walkabout. I have my other 3, though. Here's 2 of them. I think I didn't bring out one of them because she's missing her gun, and I'm missing one who's basically holding a club across her back, and I'm not sure where she's gone. She's probably in another case somewhere. And then here you go. So here's all the people who worked on this version of Necromunda back in the day. So this would have been back in the early 90s of Games Workshop and the design studio. So these are people who took part in the Necromunda campaign that essentially built the game, right? And you can see someone wearing one of the old red staff shirts in the photo. Amazing. And then here we go. Here are just some more pictures of some painted models. I have quite a large collection of old Necromunda models. And one day, we'll do something with those. So that's that Necromunda. Let's get back to talking about this Necromunda. I think we sort of covered the great bulk of what is different in the game. And then what we get into here is right after your core rules books are over, right after your core rules are over, well, how about psychers? How about now you just start adding weirds and psychers? So this was not added into this version of Necromunda until I think Gang War, one of the supplemental Gang War books, which were the soft books that they released in the first year or so of this version of Necromunda's life. So I can't remember when they added, but I know that in old Necromunda, they added in, let's put that right over his face. They added in psychers in Outlander's book, I believe. Did you ever get Bonnie Anderson? No, I didn't. I was meant to go to that day at that Games Workshop, and something came up, and I wasn't able to go. So I had planned to go to play in that campaign to get her, and I just never got a Bonnie Anderson. To be honest, don't care for the model that much. I believe it's a Gary Morley sculpt, and not to deride Gary Morley as a sculptor, but his stuff was not up to the work of Jess Goodwin or the Perrys. And if you look at the models in here, let's go back here. And we've got designed by Michael Perry and Michael Perry and Gary Morley. So I believe that Perry did. Oh, so these are Morley. I'm pretty sure Gary Morley did the Van Saar, and then I'm pretty sure that Michael Perry would have done almost everything else on this page. It's possible. No, you know what? Even looking at that bounty hunter, I can tell that's a Perry model. These are all Alan Perry, the Cawdor, who's Michael's brother, and they have similar styles. It would be interesting if someone were to do a deep dive and figure out line up Perry models and see if they could pick who sculpted what. Because if you look at Michael and Alan Perry's models, they have very, very similar design styles. Which is great because they can supplement each other when making larger ranges of models, like the Imperial Guard, right? That's all Perrys mostly. So here we have House Orlock, Michael Perry, and then your Delac are Alan Perry. If you had told me that Alan Perry did the Orlocks and Michael did the Delacs, I wouldn't argue with you, because again, very similar design styles, and it's that heroic proportion design philosophy of the mid '90s in Games Workshop. So your heads are big, your hands are big, your feet can be big and floppy. Gary Morley was renowned for doing large floppy feet. If you look at the elves that he did for Blood Bowl 3rd edition around this time, actually just a few years previous, if you look at those elves have some seriously floppy feet. It's fantastic, but they're funny to look at. And then we get into, here we go. So Escher, designed by Jess Goodwin, and Goliath, designed by Gary Morley. So, not that I don't like the Goliath models. In fact, this one right here with the shotgun, I still have him somewhere, and he is one of my favorite models from that era, and I believe I was using him in an Imperial Guard veteran squad at one point. We'll see if that ever materializes again. But Jess Goodwin did Escher, and rightfully so, because he does sculpt fantastic females. He sculpts fantastic female models, and he sculpts fantastic elf models. So take from that what you will. And then, yeah. So, and that was essentially what the core releases for Necromunda were when the game first came out. I believe they released the box, and then they released some blisters for supporting the models in the box, and then they picked 2 gangs a month that I think were released every month or so. So there would be, maybe 1 gang a month, but I feel like Escher came out at the same time as another gang. I feel like Escher were one of the last ones to come out, because we had already played considerably a large number of games with our with the gangs that came in the box, and I had subsequently bought a Van Sar gang because I didn't really think the Goliaths were all that cool. They were fun. They were stupid when we first learned how to play the game, and I still have. There are still gang members that were named from that initial campaign that he and I played that we still talk about today, like that we still reference. Like we still reference Brad Bolito. And Brad Bolito was one of my Goliaths who had his initiative, who got so injured that his initiative was essentially 0. And so we house ruled that he wasn't dead, because normally I think if your stat drops to 0, you're supposed to die or something. We decided that he wasn't dead, but anytime he moved, he had to make an initiative test or he would fall over. And that was essentially our rule for him. So at that point, I took the plastic Brad Bolito model, because I was just using the plastic Goliath, and I gave him a hand flamer and a knife. So I said, you know what, he's just going to try and get across the field and set something on fire. And if he does that, then Brad Bolito has completed his mission for the game. And that's sort of what made Necromunda fun, was that you did these incredibly silly, ridiculous things, and you would have ridiculous events happen in games that the rules facilitated in a lot of ways. The game that Nico and I played last week, which was my Escher versus his Slave Ogren gang, was one of the funniest games of Necromunda I've ever played, and it just happened that things worked out that way. And that's kind of what I love about these small-scale skirmish games, that you can build it. You can really sink your teeth into building a narrative with the game, right? And that's one of the reasons why I love Necromunda. And games that are like Necromunda that have come out in the past, I love as well. I liked playing Mordheim, but Mordheim, to me, I would rather play Necromunda, just because the setting was so cool. And that's the other thing about Necromunda, is one of my favorite. It has probably the coolest setting, the coolest science fiction setting within a science fiction setting, right? So Necromunda takes place in the 40K universe, and the 40K universe is probably one of the coolest science fiction settings, despite the fact that it's incredibly derivative of science fiction. It grew into its own thing, I'll talk about that one day, sort of where I like the whole ethos and design and the concept of Grimdark, because Grimdark is the meme, right? And how did that meme come into existence? And well, that's, you look at how Warhammer sort of came into existence, and it's because it borrowed from all this literature, we'll call it, science fiction literature, pulp literature. I think I've talked about it on every stream that I've done now, is Dune, because Dune is one of my most favorite books. I've read it a number of times. I haven't actually read it in like over a decade, and I feel bad about that. I feel like I should read it again, because it's, when I read it in my early 20s, it changed my life. And anyone who's read the first Dune book, if that book didn't sort of change the way you look at the world, then I think you missed the point of the book. Because it's dense and it explores a lot of really fantastic ideas about humanity and about how humans communicate and how humans interact and how humans control other humans and how humans essentially, how life is gamesmanship in a lot of ways, and just the Frank Herbert's his speculation on where we would be 20-something thousand years in the future, compared to, and then taking a lot of the ideas of his contemporary political problems when the books were written, which, so putting a lot of that and sort of a lot of all that together. Anyways, I'll talk about Dune another day. But if you crack open this book, there are a few books that I would say Rick Priestley borrowed whole cloth from when writing this, and Dune, the entire Dune series, all 6 books. Although I think Chapterhouse Dune was in print, was published when this was probably written. But just those ideas, and just those ideas taken from sci-fi. Heinlein would be another huge influence. Harry Harrison would be another huge influence. Michael Moorcock, probably, more so on the fantasy side of things, but this is a fantasy game. Like, make no mistake that Warhammer 40K and Warhammer Fantasy Battle are both fantasy games. And I think my buddy Ash from Guerrilla Miniature Games and I discussed sort of why that was, and at one point in one of his podcasts, or he and I at some point have sort of gone over why this is a fantasy setting. And I guess you wouldn't call it a space opera setting. You wouldn't call it's not hard sci-fi, because you're not dealing with a lot of science in here. You're dealing with a lot of mysticism, a lot of bigger, crazier ideas that would be the realm of fantasy and not necessarily the realm of science fiction. But what is the realm of science fiction? What is the realm of fantasy? That's what I kind of want to talk about on this channel, is I want to go in and really delve into things like that. Beyond just going through these books, really exploring the ideas that make this stuff so compelling to people like us, right? And why it is that, one more thing on Dune. And I just realized there's like a page coming out of my book and it's making me sad. It's like I can feel it right here on the edge. And I'm like, oh no! My 30-something-year-old copy of Rogue Trader is finally falling apart. My friend Nico, his hardcover fell apart within like months. He had one of the first or second print runs of the 40K hardcover. This is a soft cover, which I acquired several years later. It actually, at one point, it belonged to Nico's brother. But ownership and, possession and all that sort of stuff, when you're dealing with things that have been floating around for years and years and years, who knows, But I think I'm at the point now where I'm just starting to ramble. Yes, it did belong to Nico's brother. I think, didn't I just say that? I don't know. And we are at an hour 15, basically. So I don't know if anyone's got anything in the chat that they want to say. Loran says Battletech is amazing. Nico, yes, I did. Picked up Dune because of your mention of it. Loving it about 100 pages in. Thanks for that. Dude, Jankmaster, if you are reading Dune for the first time, I am actually envious of you. I think it's good that I haven't read the book in a decade, because I don't know if I have like a learning disability or something, but I tend to obsess and fanaticize about books while I'm reading them, and usually within about 6 months of rereading them, I've forgotten a lot of I sort of remember the things that I obsess about, but then I'll go back and 10 years later I'll read the book again and I'll be like, I don't remember this part at all, but I've read this like 3 times, because I've read Dune, I would say 3 times. I want to say I've read it once every decade since the first time I read it when I was 20. Wait, would that make me 50? Okay, so maybe I haven't read 3. I don't know. Maybe it probably wasn't every day. I think I read it when I was in my early 20s. I read it close around the time that this actually came out. So that would have been my early 20s, because one of the reasons why I chose Escher as my gang was because of the Bene Gesserit. They kind of reminded me of that. And in the new Necro, where they really... Where's my House of Blades book? Where they really get in depth into the houses of Necromunda. When they talk about the Escher, they're even more like the Bene Gesserit now, in some ways, not in every way. Where the Bene Gesserit would basically just mind trick people into doing what they wanted. The Escher just convinced them all to do it with drugs, right? Because the Escher are the chemical masters of Necromunda, which means that they're in a very enviable position because all of the noble houses rely on the Escher's drugs to keep them all young and alive, essentially. Because you've got these nobles that are like, they take Juvenat treatments, which prolong their lives for hundreds and hundreds of years because they're that rich that they can afford to do that, right? Well, where do you think they get the chemicals to do that from, right? And then the narco trade and the prescription drugs, right? Like, so, you know, Escher really, and that's what I like about this, is that once they get into each of the houses, they explain this is how the house has its power. So Goliath, it's all about forges and building giant machines and metal and stuff, and they essentially are the super heavy industry of Necromunda, and they also have close ties with the slaving guilds, right? Because, well, they're manual labor. They are the manual labor house of Necromunda. Not that, you know, they don't all do manual labor, but that the Goliaths are really the guys. If you want something lifted and moved from one place to another, or if you want, you know, plasticrete walls built or something, you call them the Goliaths, right? So, and then all the houses are going to have their own little thing that in the background of here, and again, I said I'll do a background video at some point, and I will. In the background of here, it's a little bit more simplified. Like they say, like, well, this house that does this, this house that does that. Escher doesn't really, they don't really get into, like, you know, what they specifically do. Like, the Delacs have always been the information merchants and the spies, right? So that's how the Delacs get by. Their power base is basically based on knowing things. The Orlocks in here, they're like truckers now. Whereas in old Necromunda, they were like, you know, you're sort of your blue collar guys, but they weren't. There was no like, we control this or we control that, right? Like, and in here it's a lot more pronounced because they've taken what was established in this version and greatly expanded on it. And just reading the lore in these books, and there's quite a few of them. I'll pull up Gangs of the Underhive here, which is, again, this is the book that will tell you how to make a gang. And it also has a lot of, so you get all your weapons and stuff in here. Your war gear, your trading charts. There's more campaign stuff in here and hired guns. Essentially, if you want to start playing Necromunda, I would start with these two books, the rule book and the Gangs of the Underhive. Or if you just want to start playing Necromunda, pick up one of the box sets. So if you can get the War in the Underhive box set, which is the one that comes with the tiles, the 2D tiles, get that, and that has Goliath and Escher in it. And there's enough models in there that you and a buddy, or you and yourself, can just start playing. You feel like the new gen artwork always falls flat. You think Underhive is out of print? I don't know. Well, I know that the other one, the Dark Uprising, is still available, and there's a rulebook in there that will get you essentially enough to play with what's in the box. I don't know if it's out of print. I think they might be doing a new version of it. Who knows, right? Who knows what they're going to do? All we know is that they're going to do house books now until this time next year. They'll be putting out the house books. 2 of them are out. House of Blades is out, and House of Chains is out. I don't actually own House of Chains yet, and I feel like I may have just... Yeah, you can still hear me. Okay, I knocked the mute button on my mic and wanted to make sure it wasn't actually muted. You guys want to hear sound, so... yeah. Necromunda, love it. My favorite game right now. And I've only played one game in the last, while, but just getting ready to play it is going to be sort of the focus of what I'm doing right now. So I'm painting my Escher. I'll pull these guys over here so you can see. So this is what I'm currently working on. These 2 I just pulled out because they're awesome. These are 2 of the resin Forge World hired guns that you can get. And I don't know what I'm going to use them as, but I'll paint them up eventually. And then this is essentially the core of my new gang. because I will be reusing the leader and the Juves, which are these two girls, from my old gang, and then most of it's like these newer models that I'm painting up for that. And there's this Chaos Space Marine helmet just sitting here, and I have no idea how it got here, but such is the mysteries of my desk, I guess. Oh, and there's a palette. Alright, so obviously I was doing some painting. So yeah, so I don't know. What else we got? The campaign in the Dark Uprising is really dark. It is. I don't want to spoil it for you. I haven't read it because I don't own it, but I had it spoiled for me, so I won't spoil it for you. But yeah, the Dark Uprising box set, I think is amazing in what they basically end up happening, and what because it. I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but you know, whatever. Yeah, I've been hearing it gets grimdark. Oh yeah, it's grimdark. All right, Lolo. Grimdark to the extreme, to the max, baby. So yeah, I don't know. This is more sort of things I want to do on my channel. Obviously, I'm not painting today. I was going to be painting today because I was going to paint her, because I realized, but I'll probably do that for tomorrow. I realized the black on her has not been highlighted, whereas the black on these ones has. And I think I left her deliberately so that I could do it on camera. But other than that, the red on them is done. And then it's be onto the flesh. And then the weapons and accessories. And then. It's funny when you are super self-aware of how you talk and what you say. And then my gang will be done. In the meantime, on the back shelf over here, I've got a bunch of Necromunda Sector Mechanicus terrain that I have to paint, and that's got to get done, and that's going to be a huge task because I have quite a lot of Sector Mechanicus terrain, but I'm at the point now where at least everything is primed, and I've sprayed everything with a metallic spray, and now it's just a matter of going on and sponging on some color, and then weathering it, and then dry brushing it, and then doing like details like lighting and whatever, you know, highlighting, dry brushing I feel like needs to make it pop on the screen. And then I'm going to start shooting some games, and those will be here on the channel. And yeah, so I'm going to go back over here, and we can look at some of the artwork. So who was it that was saying, Jankmaster, you feel that the artwork falls flat? So this is new Necromunda artwork. Sorry, pointing the wrong direction. I don't hate it, but it is modern. And there is some classic Necromunda artwork, and that's a Mark Gibbons, and that is absolutely fantastic. And why do I like that? Well, because it's like everyone likes the music of their generation. We all like the art of our generation, right? So there are kids who will look at the old stuff and will go, what is this crappy black and white? Like, it looks so silly. Look at her weird proportions. Not like this guy. Look at this guy. And then look at this enforcer. Like, but this was obviously, someone drew this, and then went into Illustrator and Photoshop and finished it digitally, because that's how a lot of illustrations are done these days. Whereas this is some sweet, sweet Ian Miller concept work that I believe predates even Confrontation, which is the first version of Necromunda, which I didn't even talk about. Confrontation being the first version of Necromunda, which was published in White Dwarfs. And there were models for it, and there was a game for it, and it was there, and then it disappeared because they focused more on 40k Second Edition. And then once 40k Second Edition had been out for a few years, all of a sudden, boom, Necromunda's back, baby. Oh, you can't see that because I just put it under the camera. That looked really good, but you can't see that because we're looking at, oh, the Redeemer. So when are they going to add Redemptionists into new Necromunda? I don't know. And there's an Escher. See, I like it, but yeah, it doesn't speak to me the way that the original artwork doesn't speak to me the way that a John Blanche would, where I look at it and I marvel and wonder at that someone could sit there with a pencil and then a pen and ink and just create that. And then a Mark Gibbons, which always had this, the fact that he worked in pencil and pen and ink. And there's a John Blanche. Amazing. So that's a John Blanche Enforcer. And you look at that Enforcer and you look at the current Enforcers and you go, there's a lot of design similarities. Here's a little thing that I'll talk about as a tease for when I get into sort of talking about the lore of Necromunda and how the lore of and how a Hive City sort of came to be. And I'm going to blame it on this guy. So I'm going to switch back. I'm going to put him here. And I'm going to switch back to my overhead. And you're going to see exactly who I'm talking about. Because if you want to know where the root core nugget, the idea of what Necromunda is came from, yeah, right here. Judge Joseph Dredd. So this is really, if you look at the Block War or the Judge Dredd miniature game that exists, that Games Workshop published in the 80s, and you look at the 2000 AD stuff that was coming out at the time and the ideas of the gang wars and the block wars and all that stuff, Necromunda's DNA is tied up with this guy so much. And I'll just leave it at that. I mean, even look at the Arbites that they produced for second edition for Rogue Trader. Look at the Rogue Trader Arbites. They're basically judges, right? If you read the Arbite background, the Redeemer is the best. Yes, thank you, Tyrant of Badab. Oh, and look at that guy. That is a Ambot. The cool thing about the Ambot, there's an Ambull inside there. They take the Ambull and its insatiable desire to dig holes, and they put it in a robot. And they say, you're good at digging, so get digging. And then they basically just, they reprogram the Ambot, because there's no robots in 40K. Well, there are robots in 40K. But 40K is kind of like Dune. And so here's where 40K stole a lot from Dune. In Dune, they had the Butlerian Jihad, which forced thinking machines to basically be forbidden technology, right? A thinking machine essentially being a computer and AI. In 40K, they don't have the thinking machines either, right? You have everything as servitor. So if you basically want a thinking computer, in Dune, you had mentats, which were humans who had mental conditioning and brains programmed to think like a computer. In 40K, you have a servitor. You take a person and you essentially turn them into a robot, right? I'm going to reach up. And, oh, here we go. I'll pull out what I'm talking about. And turning my head away from the mic, I'm sure you can't hear it. So I'm going to put a couple models down here, and then we'll just take a quick look at them. Because I'll show you what is essentially the 40K equivalent of a computer. Is these guys. So these are some models that I painted up for an Inquisitor's retinue. So those would be scribes, Adeptus Administratum personnel who have probably had parts of their brain replaced by something that enables them to think faster, and you know, like this guy here, he's got a typewriter and it's writing out a scroll, you know, but he's also got a bionic eye and like machinery on his back. So, and then this guy would be an astropath. So how do you communicate in the 40K universe? You don't just send out radio waves. You don't send out a broadcast, because it's never going to get where it needs to go, right? You would have an astropath. So if I was an Inquisitor on a planet and I wanted to communicate with an Inquisitor on another planet, how do I get a message to him? Well, I could send it physically. I could write him a letter with my quilled pen, you know, on a scroll, on a piece of parchment, and give it to a courier to take it to him. But say I need to really get in touch with him, well, I can't just beam out a radio, can't beam out a satellite signal. I need an astropath. So I tell the astropath what I want him to send, and the astropath then thinks it and broadcasts it out into the warp. And there's another astropath at the other end who's listening for it, and he hears it, and then he tells the other guy, oh, so this is what's going on. This is what's going on this planet. And that's how the Imperium communicates with itself. Another couple cool models in here. I just realized I got so this is an old. Now it's going to be me showing you some old models. So this is a old female commissar. This model was sculpted by Chris Fitzpatrick, and I want to say it came out in the early 2000s and was as available as a blister. I don't think it was ever limited edition. I just don't think that they made a ton of her, and she didn't come out when other commissar models came out. This one has had her pistol removed, and she had a different pistol at one point, and now it looks like the pistol that's on here is a plastic Imperial Guard pistol from the first plastic Imperial Guard set that GW released way back in the 80s, and for some reason that's her pistol now. But she's got a power sword. She's still a kick-ass commissar, you know. Listen, just because she shoots you in the back of the head with a las pistol and not a bolt pistol doesn't mean you're not getting shot in the back of the head, right? You should have paid attention, and you should have gone and killed the enemy. That's what your job is. You're an Imperial Guardsman. And then this. So this was one of the. I have all of these models somewhere. The rest of them are actually with the rest of my Eldar. I'm I'm not sure why this one is in this particular plastic thing, which has my Escher in it. Oh, and there's an Omega Marine in there, and some other randomness. Anyways, back on track. Space Gildas, Age of Strife might be opening at Cannes, but that's because AI turned against the creators. Yes, well, of course AI turns against its creators. You don't think that's what's going to happen? Do you not listen to the prophet Elon Musk when he discusses how AI is going to be the end of us all? And that really time travelers from the future, what we think are aliens, are actually time traveling AIs from the future? I may have just made that last part up. But anyways, so these were like some cool proto aspect warriors that Jess Goodwin sculpted. They came out in a brief period of time before White Dwarf 126, 127, which showed off the new Eldar miniatures, sort of the aspect warriors, and when that stuff was added, and I believe reprinted in this book. Let's just check the table of contents here. Eldar. So yeah, so this stuff here, which was published originally, I believe, in White Dwarf 126 and 127. White Dwarf 127 has a Les Edwards chick with a dragon on the cover, I think. Oh, we're getting into some goody stuff. Yeah, so this was the first Eldar army list that contained things that exist in the current Craft World Eldar army list. So prior to this, Eldar were Guardians, they were Space Pirates, they were Corsairs, and they were Harlequins. And that's kind of what you had for Eldar. Not much had been explored. And back in those days, in a White Dwarf, they would put actual new rules. What would essentially become the format for the Eldar Codex is this right here, the Eldar army. The background, which is all this part, so from here, so this was White Dwarf 126, which is all this. So they go into the background. Beautiful Jess Goodwin sketch was here. This is all Jess Goodwin sketches. If you can see on my wall over here, I actually have one of the prints that was available from Warhammer Art, which is the Jess Goodwin concept sketches for the Howling Banshees. That's an Adrian Smith. Beautiful, beautiful work. Wayne England, another unsung hero of Grimdark, Wayne England. Rest in peace. I wonder if, what if he's not dead and I just said that? I'm pretty sure he died a few years ago. Because there was a magic card he was working on for a goblin potion or something. And I had the playmat for it, like this Frazetta playmat. It was unfinished. He hadn't done the colors, so it was just the pen and ink. And when I realized that was like his last piece of work and that was his unfinished work, I bought the mat that Ultra Pro made for it. Yeah, he died. Yeah, thanks, Jangmaster. Yeah, it's unfortunate. But I would say Wayne England, Jess Goodwin, Adrian Smith, John Blanche. John Blanche being at the peak in terms of you want to talk about like the influence on what would become Grimdark. And I'm supposed to be writing an article about that for someone. Maybe I should do that. Sort of talking about my theories on Grimdark. Look at this. So this is a Jess Goodwin, and Jess Goodwin being a miniature sculptor, but Jess Goodwin also being a fantastic artist. And maybe one day I'll drag down my Jess Goodwin sketchbooks, and we'll go through them the way I'm doing this right now. We'll go through those Jess Goodwin sketchbooks because I have the Eldar one, both the Eldar ones, Dark Eldar and Craft World Eldar, which is where a lot of this stuff came from initially. And then I have the Gothic and the Eldritch, which has a lot of his chaos and stuff in it. So here we go. So yeah, so this is a concept sketch. So you can see, like, literally, here he is up here, Aspect Warriors. And I don't know if you can see this, but, like, they are knights. So his themes for what he's going to do. And then he draws out these sketches, and then he sculpts the models based on these sketches. And a lot of the High Elf range for Warhammer 4th and 5th editions, very specifically 5th edition, or 4th edition too. He sculpted a lot of that. At the end, they were Marauder models, and then they became Citadel models fairly quickly when Warhammer 4th edition launched, because the High Elves started sort of trickling out at the very end of 3rd edition. They started just adjusting my lumbar support here after being in this chair for an hour and a half. So Alan Bly is the one I missed the most. So other paths. So there, and then the concept of Exarchs. So then we get into the actual army list. So this would have been White Dwarf 127. So the previous month you get all the background and all that lore that I just flipped through, and then a month later, you'd get to next White Dwarf, and suddenly, boom, here's how you make an army. And of course, throughout the rest of the issue would be pictures of the miniatures, and in the back of the White Dwarf would be the blisters and the catalog numbers for a lot of the parts and stuff like that. So here we go. Avatar, 300 points. And his stats are random. Look at that. So you roll every time you take an avatar. You fork out those 300 points, and you can have a weapon skill anywhere between 5 and 10. Same with his toughness, wounds. All these things were random. And of course, his stats here and there, those 4 stats I was talking about, the 4 psychology stats are all 10s because he's the avatar. He's got a 2+ save, and it can never be less than a 4+. So basically, he had a better save here than he has had since. I think he had a 4+ invulnerable in 5th edition Codex. He got his 4+ back. And then he went back to being a demon because Gav Thorpe fucked up the Eldar. Sorry, Gav, you did. You know what did it? 12-inch shuriken catapults. 3rd edition 40k. The worst thing to happen to 40k. And then here we go. Boom. Aspect Warriors. Look at that. So here's all your different shrines. Little fluff boxes showing this is telling you about what the Banshee Mask does. A little bit of fluff here. Some story. Lore. All your weapons. What do Howling Banshees have? Well, they carry power swords and las pistols. Bet you didn't know Howling Banshees had las pistols. Yep, they did. They had las pistols way back in the day, and they have a saving throw of 4+, and then their Banshee Mask, which I believe is very similar to what it does today. But I'm way off topic now, aren't I? I'm not talking about Necromunda at all. I'm talking about Eldar. And I could do an entire series of videos on Eldar because this was my first real 40k army. My buddy Nico, who I've mentioned how many times in this chat, because as I've said, Nico and I got into miniature painting together, and nobody else we knew was into it, so we just did it with each other, and we were perfectly cool with that. But I was just talking about this guy. So yeah, so this guy was sort of released at the end of when Eldar stopped becoming, when these guys essentially became Guardians. And this guy's armed pretty baller for a Guardian. He's got a shuriken pistol, he's got a power sword, and he's got a shuriken catapult slung over his back. So this guy's awesome. And I painted him, I want to say 94, 95. Prior to painting these Necromunda, these my Necromunda Escher, so he would have been painted before she was painted, because he would have been painted for my 2nd edition Ulthway army, which I got the first time, before the first time I was fired from Games Workshop, was when I got my Eldar army. And this guy too. This guy's actually lead, which is why his weapon is so bendy. Bendy! So this is a Fire Dragon Exarch with a fire pike. And he's probably been painted and repainted. I imagine he was painted once back when White Dwarf 127 was around. And then I probably stripped and repainted him again with 2nd edition 40k. So he would have been repainted again around the same time as this model was painted. You can tell the yellow is exactly the same. And the black's exactly the same. And there's not much difference between. So they would have been painted at the same time. And then this guy. Oh, if anyone remembers my 4th edition, 5th edition. Well, it started off as a 3rd edition, late 3rd edition. Not too late, because 3rd edition was around a long time. A mid-3rd edition Space Marine army, which were called the Omega Marines. And this guy was a late addition to that army because this model came out many years later. He had 3 claws at one point. He's got 2 on one hand and 3 on the other. He basically had Wolverine claws, and he's made from the old limited edition Emperor's Champion, and I called him Weapon X. Yes, Lorand. Oh, you know him. I think this model may have, more than anything, inspired Lorand to make his Green Space Marine army. Because I had an old Green Space Marine army, which I've since sold, and I'm not sure who has it. I think I know who I sold it to, but I don't know if they still have it. They may have resold it. But there's a lot of background noise now, so I think I'm going to cut the stream there and bid you all adieu. Although I see I've got how to min-max random stats. Random stats, yes, okay. It's hard for me to monitor the chat. I should probably move this light. In fact, that light's probably been interfering this whole time. You can see I have primer on my arm because that is the sign of a true... hey, don't I look better now? Wow, just moving that light that little bit. And now I can see the chat because, you know, this is amazing. I'm just figuring these things out as I go. Anyways, Necromunda. Ooh, don't shake the table. Tremors. This version of Necromunda takes me back to when I was enthusiastic for this version of Necromunda. Extremely similar principles in the game. You're basically essentially playing the same game, just a better, cleaner, modern version of it. So that's my sum up for Necromunda. And if you want to go out and play Necromunda, see if you can get your hands on one of the box sets to start. Otherwise, grab these two books. So yeah, it's not the but what's in these two books will allow you to play so much. There's so much just packed into these two. And then you've got books I haven't even pulled down. You got the Book of Judgment, which is all about cops and law and order. You got the Book of Ruin, which is all about the robbers and the crime. The Book of Ruin is all about chaos and gene stealer cults and more chaos. And then you've got the Book of Peril, which is like bad zones and also adds more like criminal enterprise stuff into Necromunda. So there are different types of campaigns you can play. We're going to be starting with the guys are the construction guys. This is becoming a disaster. I'm surrounded by noise now. You get the it's okay. Everyone's got a job to do, right? You get so much of how to play Necromunda. We're doing a Dominion campaign to start, and then I think we're going to add in the law and misrule aspect of the campaign, which means that you're no longer fighting for territories. So the Dominion campaign is all about getting territories. It's all about grabbing land, right? The law and misrule campaign is all about running rackets, right? So you have these enterprises that you're involved in, and they could be legal and they could be illegal. And that's why the forces are around to make sure that you stay legal, because if you go, you can be outlawed, and then who knows what you could do, what might happen. There's drawbacks and advantages to both being law-abiding and being an outlaw gang. And then there's the bad zone stuff, so you can add more elements to your terrain. And I have a feeling that we're going to get even more of that once they release the Ash Wastes stuff, which, I mean, they showed us pictures of it. It's got to be coming. I want vehicle rules. I'm just going to look to the back to see if I have my... oh, here we go. I want vehicle rules. No, but not necessarily for this, but this is also a hint of things to come on the channel. If you know what that is, at some point, probably in the month of October, you're going to get to see me paint that. At least that's the plan. I got to get Necromunda stuff finished so that I can move on to other stuff I want to do for the channel, especially the month of October. October is going to be a big month on the Eternal Chronicles, because it's my month, and people like me, and you can't take this month away from us. October is, here, I'll throw you something else. This is just for the people who are still watching the stream. You get to, look at that guy. All right, I'm gonna bring him towards the camera, right over the Death Dealer's shield there. Look at that boy. Oh, that is one happy little orc. Yes, vehicles in the Underhive. Well, if you're going to put out Ash Waste rules, Ash Waste are essentially Mad Max, right? So you need vehicle rules. And you could easily add vehicle rules to this core system. It wouldn't be hard. It would probably be another layer of sort of, stats and rules for interaction stuff. But the core rules of the game are certainly open for building and adding to it. Just let me know if the sound is dreadful. So yeah, I was just looking to see if I've got my Book of Judgment and Book of Peril. So there's the Book of Judgment with the Enforcer on the front, and he's not an Arbite. He is an Enforcer, so he's a Palatine Enforcer. So he is basically local cops. Arbites are Imperial cops. The Arbites don't police the Underhive. The Arbites could give two shits what goes on in the Underhive, unless there's something going on in the Underhive that really requires their attention, like a full-blown chaos incursion, right? Or a Xenos outbreak or something, right? Then the Arbites don't care. The Arbites are in the top. They're in that top part of the hive, right? Oh, on that book, let's pull out the book that we know that the hive picture's in, the front cover of. So they're up here. The Arbites are up here, essentially policing the great houses and Helmar, right, and making sure that they're paying their tithe, because that's literally what the Arbite's main job is to do, is to go around to planetary governors and make sure that they're paying their taxes. So they are the Arbites are the IRS. They're the enforcement wing of the IRS. Yeah. So I guess on that note, I don't know what else to say other than if you're watching this and you already played Necromunda, then you know how fantastic this game can be. If you've not played the new Necromunda and you're watching this, I hope that this inspires you to give the game a try. I'm going to do more videos like this. I want to get into the background, but I actually need to read a lot of the background. I was rereading the rules today in preparation for this, for my morning constitutional, and stopped in the park and read for a bit and did some reading last night just to sort of catch myself up on the rules aspects of the game, because I have to have a really strong grasp of the current rule set for when we start our campaign, so that when I am making videos and filming Necromunda games for content for this channel, that I'm not getting things all screwed up and wrong and incorrect, and then having people in the comments tell me that I'm terrible at playing Necromunda and should just stop playing Necromunda and probably play something simpler. Okay, brief note on Necromunda, and I just sort of thought about saying this right now, like that's what that heavy pause was, that pregnant pause that I had there. This game inspired a lot of other games. It inspired Gorka Morka, which came out a few years later, and it inspired Mordheim, which came out a few years later. And it's inspired a bevy of campaign system games that are published by companies like Osprey. Like, you look at a lot of those blue bound little game books that they make. You look at games, like Ash Barker, Guerrilla Miniature Games, Last Days. Ash may not want to admit this, but it really started off as a Necromunda mod. Like, the way that he sort of approached building that game was, let's take Necromunda and put it into what I love, which is I love zombie movies, right? So there's a lot of this game in a lot of the games you play these days. You look at the Crusade system that they've put out for 40k 9th edition, and that Crusade system would not probably exist in that format if it wasn't for this game. And there may have been a game that influenced Necromunda to the extent of having a campaign system where things grow. I mean, Rogue Trader had aspects of that, right? And then Rogue Trader, as Rogue Trader moved to battle manual, vehicle manual, here we go, sort of those orc books. Like, those orc books make strong reference throughout the book about playing in a campaign, right? Like, if you're doing this, and after your campaign game, and you've got this many, you've got a mech boy or you've got a pain boy in your mob, you know, you get this many points of models back. So there's those sort of those campaign aspects. But this is the first game that I played that really codified that stuff into a rule set. And if you look at a lot of modern games, if I go to, you know, my local game store and I look at their miniature game wall, and I look at all the spines of all those books, and I guarantee you 7 out of 10 of every one of those books I look at will have this game in its DNA. And that's what I'm going to leave you about. And that's why I think Necromunda is the best game that Games Workshop's ever published. In either version, this is the best game they published in the last 20 years, and this was probably the previous best game that they published. You could look at games like Blood Bowl, which had team advancement and things like that, but really it was Necromunda that turned it into gave you way more of a RPG role-playing experience with a tabletop skirmish style game. So, all that being said, I'm going to sign off. Someone argued that Battlefleet Gothic was the best. See, this is what happens when I'm going to sign off, and then suddenly someone's got to come in and throw something at me. Like, some would argue that Battlefleet Gothic was the best. I would argue that it wasn't. Battlefleet Gothic is a great game. The best game Andy Chambers ever made, as far as I'm concerned, because I don't consider Warhammer 3rd Edition that great a game. I love Battlefleet Gothic. I'm going to drag my Battlefleet Gothic rulebooks up here to go through them one day, because I have the Battlefleet Gothic core book, I have the Armada book, and I have the White Dwarf Warp Storm compendium of stuff, and I'll go through those one day. I'll make a video just like this video that'll all be all about Battlefleet Gothic. I won't have models or anything because I don't have any Battlefleet. I think I have 1 or 2 like bits of ships. I had a ton of Battlefleet Gothic, and regretfully it was sold off over time. I had a huge Imperial fleet and I had a huge Chaos fleet. The game was not perfect. The game was time consuming. The game was hard to play at the kind of sizes of a game that I would see a fleet-based battle work. If you played a small game, like 1,000 points, like a couple of cruisers with some escorts, and maybe one big ship, like one battleship or one like battle cruiser, the game worked really well. 1,000 points, 1,250, 1,500 is pushing it. What I see as a battle fleet, what I would want to see as a Battlefleet Gothic game would be starting around the amount of models you would get around the 2,000 point mark. Big fleets. One giant flagship with squadrons of battle cruisers and frigates and escorts and fighter tokens and torpedo tokens flying everywhere and stuff. And it's really, really hard to manage on a 2-dimensional surface. But it's fun, and it looks cool. The game looked fantastic. Thoughts on Man of War? So I guess we'll move from Battlefleet Gothic to Man of War. Man of War was when I first worked at Games Workshop. Before the first time I was fired from Games Workshop, Man of War was one of the games that we had set up to demo. And me being me, I could have demoed 40K, I could have demoed Fantasy Battle, and we would rotate through Man of War or Blood Bowl. We'd have set up on the small table at the front of the store. It's at the Queen Street store, if you remember. So we either had Blood Bowl set up on that table or we had Man of War set up on that table. When I would come in the morning, I'd always set up Man of War because that was the game I wanted to demo. Someone walked through the door, and, as a Games Workshop salesperson, I push the demo on you, right? You're going to demo. Never played Dreadfleet, have no opinion on it. It comes with a mat made out of cloth, so when you try and move a model on it, the whole mat just wants to slide with it. I don't care about Dreadfleet. Man of War was just the funnest game to demo because it was simple and easy. You had these little templates that you would use for measuring your cannons, and they would have 3 zones in them, and where are you in my zone, and moving the models around. Really quick, really quick game to play it at its basic level, which is what Battlefleet Gothic could have been. And if you ever played Battlefleet Armada or Space Fleet Armada, which was the precursor to Battlefleet Gothic, that had a really bizarre dice mechanic where you took the box lid, and the box lid had like a hash grid in it, and 4 of the squares of the 9 would say hit, and 5 of them would say miss, and you tossed dice in the box lid, and wherever they landed in the box lid told you whether you hit or missed. Yes, that was a game mechanic that Games Workshop employed for a number of games that they published in the late 80s, early 90s. These were simplified versions of the game, and Space Fleet was literally a simplified game, and then they put subsequent advanced rules into White Dwarf magazines. Like, all of a sudden, now you weren't just counting where those dice landed, but what the numbers showed on them. So it's like, I landed in a hit box and I rolled a 5+, therefore I get some additional effect. So still the core basic ridiculous mechanic of tossing dice into a box lid and seeing where they landed. And believe me and my friend Nico had fun trying to gently scoop dice, to the point where we had to come up with a rule where, no, you have to hold the dice and drop them from a certain height. Otherwise, we were literally trying to game the game by dropping dice in certain places so they would land in certain squares, because that's what you do, right? That's what you do when you play games. But yeah, Man of War, my favorite game to demo when I worked at Games Workshop back in the early 90s. If I had to demo 40K or I had to demo Fantasy Battle, that was fine too. I will shave for tomorrow because I feel like I'm a little scruffy. So yeah. Anyways, it's 2 o'clock. I've been on the air for almost 2 hours now. This is my longest stream. It's the stream I've had the most amount of engagement with, and it is my 4th stream. So I'm really pumped and excited with how these things are going. I'd love to hear some feedback. You can give me feedback on the Eternal Chronicles Facebook page, or you can just give me feedback here. You can comment on this video whenever, I guess, Facebook sticks it up, YouTube sticks it up. yeah, so I'm gonna sign off there unless Tyrant of Badab keeps engaging me to talk about small battles that aren't what you want. Second edition 40k. Second edition 40k was a slog. Second edition 40k was a slog. We regularly played 1,500 to 2,000 point games, and we knew that that would take us the better part of a day to do. And we would play on a sheet of drywall that we threw a green sheet over. And I think drywall sheets are like you buy, and they were like 9x5. So we had this huge table in the middle of my mother's living room that we would set up. And then eventually it moved upstairs, and I think I ended up cutting it down and getting a proper 8x4. But at that time, 8x4 was the size that you wanted to play 40k on if you were going to play a game of 2,000 points of 40k second edition. Blood Bowl second edition was a super slog. Yes, I guess. I didn't play much Blood Bowl second edition. I own Blood Bowl second edition. My copy of Blood Bowl second edition is actually up here. It's just on the other side there. Is my copy of Blood Bowl second edition, which I didn't really play much of. Nico had, but we didn't play much. Third edition Blood Bowl I played a ton of, and I played that version of Blood Bowl for 25, 30 years. So the last time I played Blood Bowl, it was essentially the third edition version of Blood Bowl. I've not played the new Blood Bowl either. All those old games are fun, man. You know, I wish I still had my copy of Squelch, because I would play Squelch anytime. You know, and again, I'm going to reference Nico again, because he would play Squelch with me, and we would hide the big bad gobbo somewhere at my cottage. We'd hide the big bad gobbo so that when you turned over the terrible troll and you're both looking for the big bad gobbo, it's like, oh, he's over there in a drawer underneath the china hutch, because that's where we put the big bad gobbo. So we'd both race over there and try and grab it as quick as possible. It's these silly things. I don't know. I'm gonna call this at 2 hours, which according to my live stream thing means I have about a minute and a half before I hit the 2 hour mark, and we'll try and lock it down at 2 hours. So yeah, this is sort of what I want to do on off days, and my phone is now ringing. So I'll get off the phone there. Oh my goodness. So you've now lost my visual because someone called me. Wow, and I have to restart the app. So, no better time than that, really, to kill the stream, eh? When someone calls you on your phone and then your webcam starts ringing, because for some reason it's tied to your phone, and I think I had to do that in order to get the app onto this thing, because Apple is this closed system, right? So yeah, so I've got 50 seconds left that I will use to come up with a good sign-off, so that we can all say goodbye. Lighter fluid. And I guess I just won't do like a 30-second countdown. I'll come up with something. So, I don't know, woozle wuzzle? Is that what passes for entertainment these days? And when, at some point I'll do a room tour as well of the Chronicler's lair, as this, I guess, is. It's actually, you can see I usually close that, but I realized I just did this whole 2 hour. Aren't you entertained? Are you not entertained? Not anymore. So we got about 5 seconds left. So I guess I'm going to kill the stream about there. And then you guys, I'll see you all back here tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel. See? Still the derivative sign off. Oh well. Such is life. C'est la vie.